Into the Unknown, the ancient voyage of Hanno the Navigator. A visitor to the city of Carthage, which is synonymous with modern-day Tunis in northern Tunisia, in ancient times, would have come across a strange text inscribed on the wall of a temple in the center of the city. Here, in a text of not much more than 1,000 words, was an account of a mysterious voyage which had been made by Hanno the Navigator in the late 6th century BC. The text is impenetrable in places. For instance, we hear that Hanno and his followers sailed to, quote, a river called Cretes and reached a bay which contained 3 islands, bigger than Kern. After a day's sail from here, we arrived at the end of the bay, which was overhung by some very great mountains, crowded with savages clad in animals' skins. Though the text might be difficult to interpret, scholars are in no doubt that the account provides evidence of a voyage down the coast of Western Africa 2,000 years before the Portuguese began traversing down the same region in order to find a sea route around Africa. Here we tell the incredible story of Hanno the Navigator and his bizarrely not well-known voyage of discovery over 2.5 millennia ago. Not only is Hanno the Navigator an obscure figure today, but the entire state of Carthage is unknown to many. Carthage was a great Western Mediterranean power in ancient times that was based out of what is now Tunisia in North Africa. The city was a colony of the Phoenicians, a great trading and maritime people that first emerged as a loose confederacy of city-states in the Levant around the coastal regions of Lebanon and Syria in the 12th century BC. In the centuries that followed, they established colonies around the Mediterranean. One of these was Carthage, founded on the site of modern-day Tunis in northern Tunisia. Legend has it that the city was founded in 814 BC. Over time, Carthage became a powerful state in the western Mediterranean, one which conquered large parts of the North African coastline and established further colonies of its own on the coast of Hispania and on the islands of Sicily, Sardinia and Corsica. The reason why Carthage is not more well known of today is that in the 3rd century BC it engaged in an epic struggle with a rising Roman Republic for dominance of the western Mediterranean. Needless to say, the Romans won. However, back in the 6th century BC, when Rome was still a provincial backwater in central Italy, Carthage was a major power already with trading ties far and wide. It was at this time that Hanno the Navigator, a figure who we know virtually nothing about other than that he led this famous expedition, set off to voyage down the coast of Western Africa. The exact date of this is unclear, but it was around the late 6th century BC. So perhaps between 530 BCE and 500 BCE. At the time, the people of the Mediterranean knew little about what stood beyond what to the Greeks was known as the Pillars of Heracles, the Greek demigod who was a son of Zeus. We know these Pillars of Heracles as the Straits of Gibraltar today. In venturing beyond them, Hanno and his Carthaginian crew were heading into the unknown. In many ways, it is incredibly surprising that we actually know anything about Hanno's voyage. Almost all textual evidence of Carthaginian culture was destroyed by the Romans when they defeated them in 146 BCE at the end of the third and final war the two states engaged in. That ultimate victory saw the Romans level the city of Carthage to the ground, sow the ground with salt and sell the surviving Carthaginians into slavery in one of the first recorded acts of genocide in human history. Almost nothing of Carthaginian culture survived the devastation. However, Roman and Greek scholars who had visited Carthage prior to 146 BCE had written down Hanno's account inscribed on the temple walls in the center of the city. It was then preserved over the centuries in the writings of later scholars. It has come down to the modern world through 2 manuscripts, one written in Constantinople in the 9th century and the other during the 14th century. Had it not been copied out by dozens of scribes over the centuries, we would not know about it today. The name given to it is usually the Periplus of Hanno, periplus being a Greek word for an account of a voyage or circumnavigation. So what did Hanno relate in his Periplus? He begins by telling us that the Carthaginian government had ordered him to sail beyond the Pillars of Heracles, and to try to settle colonies in the lands he would discover there. This was no small voyage. According to the account, he set sail with a fleet of 60 galleys carrying 30,000 men and women with food and equipment for this massive naval expedition. It then provides an extensive account of regions they sailed through, and further indicates that they settled several colonies along the coast. Unfortunately, there is an interpretative issue when it comes to this, one which has caused endless debate over the centuries about where exactly Hanno and his many followers visited. He does not use anything approximating to modern names in his description, nor were there any known names of these regions available for him to use. Therefore, a lot of what we can say about where he visited is conjectural, but there is sufficient geographical landmarks described to make sound guesses. For instance, early on Hanno describes them as passing a rocky promontory, which based on the description is assumed to have been Cap Bedouza or Cap Contine, not far from Marrakesh in modern-day Morocco. Another description of them, quote, reaching a bay which contained 3 islands bigger than Kern. After a day's sail from here, we arrived at the end of the bay, which was overhung by some very great mountains, has been identified as a description of the region around the islands of the Tidra archipelago off the coast of Mauritania. And so it goes on. Inevitably, once the points of geographical reference become more complex, it is more difficult to tell where Hanno and his many followers might have been. However, his constant reference to the natives they encountered when they landed on the coast as being Ethiopians, by which Hanno meant they were very dark-skinned, clearly indicates that they had headed well beyond the coast of Morocco and Mauritania, to places south from Senegal to the Gold Coast and perhaps even the Gulf of Guinea. This is further substantiated by reference to the fleet sailing for 12 days south at one time, 5 days at another, and so forth, distances which would have brought them several hundred kilometers further south, if not thousands. Elsewhere there is reference to their passing by a waterway midway through their voyage, which most scholars accept was probably the mouth of the river Senegal. Thereafter they passed round a promontory and set eyes on what was described as, quote, an immense expanse of sea. Scholars believe this was the Gulf of Guinea, and that their onwards voyage might have even brought them as far as the coast of modern-day Nigeria before they turned back. Ultimately, it is hard to know for certain where Hanno is referring to. Centuries later, the great Roman encyclopedist, Pliny the Elder, would even speculate that they had rounded Africa altogether and reached the Indian Ocean, much like the Portuguese would 2 millennia later. While this is probably not accurate, there is agreement that Hanno and his fleet certainly reached as far south as Senegal, almost certainly beyond that to the coast of Sierra Leone and Liberia, and perhaps further still to the Gulf of Guinea and the coast of Ghana, Togo, Benin, and perhaps even Nigeria. The legacy of their voyage is with us in ways still today. For instance, towards the end of their explorations, before they turned back to the Pillars of Heracles, the Carthaginians came to an island where they described what they believed to be some sort of primitive savage humans that attacked them. They called them gorillae. The word is still with us today and was applied in 1847 to describe the species of ape that the Carthaginians probably encountered gorillas. Of course, a question hangs over all of this. Why? If Hanno and the Carthaginians had begun to explore the western coast of Africa and made major advances in this area, did they not keep going, especially given the tantalizing references to them actually establishing colonies during their voyages? Clearly they perceived that what Hanno and his men had achieved was significant. Why else would they have inscribed the text of the narrative of the voyage on the wall of a prominent temple, if they did not view it as being a significant thing to have accomplished? It makes little sense then that they did not launch further expeditions. While there is no clear answer from the documentary evidence as to why they did not continue their investigations down the coast, we can speculate on what happened. Perhaps further voyages were launched, but they failed to build on Hanno's initial discoveries, and so no evidence of them has survived. Alternatively, they simply decided not to invest the necessary resources to fit out further expeditions and send them to the region. Voyages of exploration over the centuries have always had a financial dimension. They are generally dispatched if there is a significant financial gain to be had. What the account of Hanno's voyage makes clear is that rich cities and societies were not found. Instead, the Carthaginians only encountered primitive cultures, at least from their perspective, and so they had no financial incentive to launch additional voyages to follow up on Hanno's initial discoveries. It would be another 2,000 years before anyone from the Mediterranean voyaged this far down the western coast of Africa. Yet while Hanno's explorations might have been abortive, they should clearly be better known about today.